You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. We're the show that tries to help you as a leader kind of break everything down and maybe think a little bit differently about the challenges that you face and the ideas that you've got. Don't try to overcomplicate things. Sometimes the best answer is just a good old-fashioned common sense one. Today, my guest is someone who has been through the journey of working and making the transition of a family-owned business. He has done so successfully, by the way, but there were some stories along the way. He's going to share a few of those with us. He also happens to be in a marketing space, and I thought it'd be interesting. He's got some background in branding and rebranding for those who are predominantly B2B operators. So anyway, without further ado, I want to introduce Ed Delia. Ed, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you.
Yeah. So first, just a quick shout. Where are you located? Tell the folks what geography you live in.
We are based in White House, New Jersey.
Okay.
Which is considered central New Jersey. Okay.
Nice. And as I teased out, you have a story of being in a family-owned business and made the generational transition, as I recall. Can you give us a sort of the back of the envelope thumbnail version of that story, and then we'll dig into some of the details?
Absolutely, sure. So Deli Associates was founded by my father, Michael Delia, back in 1964. And I'm the youngest by 10 years. I have 3 siblings. All, by the way, did a turn through Deli Associates at some point. And that was the nature of our life. And I think probably not uncommon to a lot of other family businesses where you kind of grow up around it. And you don't really think much of it. It's just part of your life. So when I was 7 or 8 years old, I was helping some of the people collate press kits. When I was in my young teens, I was working with my brother to help erect trade show booths and attending trade shows. My dad started the business as a traditional B2B public relations and advertising industry. So a lot of our clients were, very, very nutsy, boltsy, and that hasn't changed too much. We still service who we affectionately call the brands behind the brands, which are B2B companies in the supply chains of other companies. By my young teens, I think I was writing press releases. I was doing media analysis at like 17, going on video shoots, shortly thereafter, and all the while never thinking that I would join the family business. In fact, a good friend of mine who I was standing next to when I was about to graduate reminds me often that one of the things I said to him before receiving that diploma was, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, but I'll be darned if I go to work for my old man. So about a month later, I'm turning down a job opportunity to join Deli Associates full time, and that was back in '95. Some years after that, we started a buyout process, which in retrospect, I'm glad we did, because I think that next generations that buy the business or do the buyout and go through that process have a greater appreciation for the value of what they have. So I was, albeit I had to live very poor for a long time, but nonetheless, I'm glad I went through that process. And then around 2000, my dad fully retired, and the ship was mine, so to speak. And I really had a passion for brands. And around that time frame, I was really puzzled by something, which was that was around the time of the commercialization of the internet. And I was wondering, gosh, why is a company one way offline, but when they go launch their website, they almost like reimagine the brand? And I'm like, that doesn't really make sense. It's still one brand. It's one message to the market. And shouldn't they be common? And that's really what set forth the development of what we now call the brand leadership solution, which is our proprietary and patented process for brand development or brand reimagination, to make sure that B2B brands have an understanding of brand and how to empower brands at all touch points to drive sustainable growth. So that's really where I took my passion, and I'm proud to say that this year we're celebrating year 60 of Deli Associates. So a wonderful milestone year for us.
Absolutely, and congratulations on that. Boy, that's quite a legacy to be able to speak to. I don't want to get away from the family transition issues. I'd like to get into that, but first, let's talk about what you said on the branding. And one thing that jumped out at me was that idea that it is interesting that companies stand up and show up and do things day by day, but then when they start thinking about what they want their web presence to look like, they somehow get persuaded to come up with this, I don't know, glossier version of who and what they are, grander, bigger, and maybe that's not by any means necessarily better. And then if anyone does commit and buy in, they experience something different, and they've got that sort of cognitive disconnect of, well, that's not the story I saw on the website. What are we doing here? How's that? So talk a little more about how that manifests itself and how it shows up and complicates the ultimate customer experience.
Sure. There's a very easy way to tell if a company may have a branding problem or a brand positioning problem. And that's if they have a website in development and it's stuck and they can't get to completion. It's usually stuck not because of a technical issue or because, the colors on this image are not quite right, or it's usually stuck because they're struggling to determine how to present themselves to the digital world. And that's really a brand positioning issue. That's not a web development issue. However, a lot of times companies endeavor to say, we need to reimagine our website, and then they get stuck. So whenever they're stuck, one of the things that I always ask is, well, is there something more going on here than just, hey, we can't get this thing to a completion point? Because by today's standards, it's not hard to get a website to a completion point, but sometimes figuring out the brand and how to be positioned does take some heavier thinking, and oftentimes heavier thinking than maybe the website development firm that was empowered to do that work doesn't have the resources or knowledge to guide. So that's one thing that I often look for, is if you're stuck, and it doesn't have to be a website, it could be on any communication, maybe on a trade show exhibit or some other expression of the brand. If ever there's a stuck point, that means that people are not quite sure how to position themselves and how to represent themselves. And that's usually where some brand development or reimagining can help.
It's funny you say that. I can think of a firm I'm working with right now that is exactly there. When I first engaged with them about 9 months ago, there was talk of a new website, and everybody was excited, and some drafts and previews went around, some sandbox versions came around, and next thing you know, it was announced everything was suspended. and it's like, why? These look great, and what I'm seeing is consistent with the story I've been told. So what's wrong with this? Why aren't you going live? And at this moment, as we are recording this, the site is still not revised, and there is a site, but it's not the new one.
Right.
And business decisions that are being made, everybody says, well, we're not going to change the current website because we got the new one coming. And it's, yeah, but when's the new one going to get there? So
yeah,
it is.
Another telltale sign is if any forward-facing officials of the company, they might be service or sales or business development, if they kind of cover up or don't share what that URL is, that means that they don't feel conviction in the brand that they're representing from a positioning standpoint. So that's basically their way of subconsciously saying, I've got a stronger brand than my company, and that shouldn't really be the case. The external personnel should be ambassadors of the brand. They should be proud and have great confidence in the brand, so much so that they would want to share it with the outside world.
Right.
We hope they would,
Absolutely.
because every single outward person is an ambassador with a reach to tell that wonderful story. And if they're not, or if they have any hesitations to do so, that means, again, there might be a brand problem at play.
Well, and when you say that, I'm thinking about, I have done a lot of work with clients, and we've talked about it here on this show as well. And that is that if the culture you have at your company doesn't support the brand, your brand effort and work and all the money and time you spend putting a brand definition together is dead on arrival if the culture doesn't support it.
Yeah. In our process, we, to make sure that doesn't happen, we elicit internal voices very early on in our process. So we really want to hear from those brand ambassadors. What do they think? What do they feel? How do they feel about the brand? What does it mean to them? Because if you don't get that support or that input, it's like sending them off with a suit that doesn't fit right. They feel uncomfortable. Whereas when you wear the brand, when you speak to the brand and represent the brand, it should feel like a perfect fit. Like, oh, I love this suit. It's my favorite one. So by getting that input early, we're able to make sure that when we get to the next or the reimagined expression of that brand, we're in alignment with, how the people think, and we are factoring in and integrating those cultural attributes that bind that organization together as well, because that's key. They've got to feel it, they've got to want it, they got to like it, they got to be comfortable with it. How on earth could they expect somebody else to feel that way if they didn't feel that way themselves?
There's been a lot written, that at least it's come across my scope in the last couple of years, and it feels to me, and I'm not a marketing guy, many people know that, but it feels to me like the focus on the ability to define a brand has taken some sort of pivot, and maybe the pivot I'm thinking of is just more in the story telling itself. There was a time when brand definition and brand story was all about, hey, look at me, look at me, look at me. But now there's a lot of focus and teaching around, no, let's look at you, meaning you, the customer, and trying to hook into the customer journey and what their pain points are, what their challenges are, and why your brand as a company might be the solution for them. And so it's a little bit of a upside down sort of pivot that's happened. And talk us through that. And obviously with your length of time in the business, you've probably seen those changes as well. So.
Absolutely. And you're right on, Doug. You're very astute to point that out. Really, it's a number of factors that created that shift, that philosophical shift, just from how brands engage the marketplace fundamentally. And the shift was largely started or initiated from the mainstream commercial use, at least in the B2B space, of the internet. What that did is it basically empowered the buyer. And up until that point, the buyer really didn't have a lot of power. When it comes to the B2B landscape, the buyer was very much entrusting to predominantly sales professionals who were professional sellers, were very astute at a certain product or service in an industry, and they were seen as the experts. So what they said was treated as gold and was bought. And the channels of communication were very fixed in the B2B landscape. TV, not really so relevant. It's really more trade shows and events, trade advertising, PR, and then some direct communication. Well, digital communications changed all that and greatly fragmented the ability for brands to speak and for people to receive that information. And now the buyer is armed with massive amounts of information before they even pick up that phone or fill out that inquiry form to actually talk to somebody. They've already done their homework. So it behooves all B2B brands to say, to be customer-centric. It's really about, not so much about saying, hey, let's come up with this great product or service and go sell it like heck, and go sell it till you drop. And eventually they'll succumb and they'll buy it. The more contemporary strategies, let's find a great audience let's figure out what they need, and let's align our product or service to those needs. And let's help them see and take that journey to see that we're the best choice. And that's really the shift. And that's where we are today. It's less selling. It's more about empowering with information, empowering with knowledge, empowering to make a buying decision. And then ultimately, when they do, they pounce because they already know. They've vetted. They've done their homework. They've spoken to many people. Nobody makes a B2B buying decision lightly. That's the real big difference between B2B and B2C, in my view, is, if you go to the store and, your wife asks you to pick up, some flour and you got the wrong brand. Okay. It costs you another trip to the store and maybe a few dollars at worst if it was opened, right? If you have a manufacturing or processing line and a plant manager specified the wrong piece of equipment to run said flour and process it and package it, that's a really bad day. That may cost somebody their job. That may cost millions of dollars. That may lose slotting fees. That may miss ship dates. There's a massive consequence. So, it is a serious professional buying decision and therefore a serious selling proposition. And the brand behind that, has to understand and demonstrate the competencies to say, hey, we got you covered.
When you do enter in with a client company to go through kind of a top to bottom rebranding, is there a standard time cycle that is typical, or does it depend on the industry and the company?
Well, since we have a process, our process can be executed from 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes that's stretched or compressed depending on the conditions or circumstances of the brand assignment in question. So if it's a singular brand, it's going to happen quicker. We were recently involved in a rebrand of a company that was grown up by acquisition, and it was basically aligning 6 divisions to one new brand and building out all 6 to make that make sense so that they could work independently or collectively. So that was a bit more of an involved assignment. So that took a little bit longer. But when it's more of a straightforward singular brand identity, whether it be a company, product, a service, or a persona even, those tend to happen more rapidly.
And I'm curious, kind of when you get over the goal line and you shape and frame up the new story, what are the typical reactions when it's rolled out to the company and all the decision makers that might have been involved when they see the final product? What's usually the reaction?
Usually it's excitement, and they're like, how soon can we launch? Because we've brought them along as part of the process. So it's not really a surprise to them. We've taken them along the journey with us. We've gotten their inputs. We've demonstrated, we've heard what they've said. We've also solicited, in many cases, marketplace intelligence. So talking with their customers, talking with industry, as well as assessing the competition. So when we are, at that point of saying, this is what your new imagined brand will be, they're delighted, but they're rarely surprised. Like, oh my gosh, where'd you go with this? We've taken them on the journey. They know we've looked at everything. And, we have a rule here at Deli Associates. If we don't have conviction in it, our client will never see it. Because how on earth could we expect them to believe in and endorse something that we ourselves don't have conviction with? So needless to say, lots of really good ideas never leave the house, if you will. But then one would argue, if we can't defend it, it's probably not that great of an idea. It just looked really cool, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I've had the good fortune over the years to be on your side of the table in some of these projects as a hired outside advisor by companies. If they want to engage with a firm like yours, I'm inevitably inserted on like I said, your side, and I get to watch some of the sausage making. And I have been in some think tank sessions where the idea makers on a team like yours are going around the table spitballing and brainstorming ideas, and you see the whiteboard and all these, and you're sitting there just in awe of how these guys can do that and the things they come up with. And you go, yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. No, that one's good, and then all of a sudden it's like, how do you pick and where do you go with it? And I've often wondered how many of those ideas get tagged and put in a folder and for recycling later, not to be repeated, but to be used because they weren't used the first time,
Yeah. I think the hardest thing for us is if we know in our hearts that something is right, but for some reason, and often it's it's not a brand related reason, that our client is not seeing what we're seeing, that's hard because we have, a certain vision. They're not sharing that vision in that moment. But I've also noticed that sometimes it's we had this happen last summer where we presented it was a gorgeous brand. It was dead on. It aligned with their values. It aligned with their culture. It aligned with their services. It did everything that we set out to do. And there was some resistance by the leadership team. And they asked us to take another look at it. And when all was said and done, they went back to the original. And they said, no, you know what? That was really good. And kind of found their way. And I was delighted because, we knew that it was the right way forward. And that company is exploding right now. And they're utilizing the brand. People are getting behind it. It's really exciting.
Well, let's shift gears. Let's go back to the family story part, your legacy with your dad founding the company and operating for many years, and then you stepping in and making the transition. Several questions come to mind. One, you alluded to two older siblings who apparently opted, or three, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Who I guess opted not to take key roles or leadership roles or be the guy to take over. Talk to us about how that unfolded.
Sure. Yeah. So I have two older brothers, an older sister. My sister's the oldest. I even had a brother-in-law involved in the business for a number of years. And, I think that they all wanted to give it a try. They all wanted to see what it was like. And I think that there was just maybe too much friction between them and my father at the time. I think I'm the beneficiary of coming along 10 years later where, some of that, he definitely mellowed out as the years went by.
The beaches got softened, right?
And I think also, he was, the year he retired, he had just turned 70. So I think he was, definitely at a different point in his career too, where, it takes a lot of energy, to be in this business, to be in any business, right? It takes a lot of energy. And he was a hard worker. But I think he was, starting to downshift a bit. And so I think, I kind of benefited from the timing being right. And it's not an uncommon tale, families are families, they're going to love each other. They're going to fight with each other, at the end of the day, hopefully everybody's still loving each other. When you bring a business into the mix, sometimes it's very hard to maintain that disciplined separation of family and business and to not let the two kind of spill into each other. That's really hard. I would say one of the reasons why maybe I was able to progress where my siblings, elected not to was, well, in part, I think my father was in a different place, but also I was very deliberate about, listen, when we're together as a family, we're going to be a family. We're not going to talk business. When we're in the business, we're going to be doing business, and we're not going to talk family, And, I was very disciplined about that because, I'd watched my siblings go through, and I'm like, if I'm going to make it through, I need to do things a little differently. And that's how we managed it.
That really resonates with me. As some of my listeners know, I've told a story. My wife and I actually created a company a number of years, more than 20 years ago. And operated that for a number of years and did in fact have one of our sons join us, but we set that rule that, at home was home and at work was work. And it was the way I went about it. I defined roles and responsibilities. Even my wife and I together, we had made a vow and a commitment for the business that she was going to be responsible for certain things and I had other things, and we were going to draw bright lines around those boxes. And the rule was whoever had the box was responsible for the final decision. The other one didn't get to snipe at it or shoot at it, or, it just wasn't good. Now, we would talk about it and make what ended up being a collaborative decision, but nonetheless, if push came to shove, whoever had the box had the decision, and that was our agreement. And it worked very well for us. And people say, how in the world did you work with your wife for 5 years? And it was like, very nicely, thank you. The business was enough trouble and challenge on its own without us trying to create some extra challenge between us.
There's upside too, though, Doug. I mean, I recall, some presentations that jointly I made, and my sister was involved in the business when I was coming into it. So it was my sister, my father, and I were involved at a period of time. And when the three of us were on the same page and we were doing something jointly, it was a powder keg. I mean, we were so aligned, so in sync, to know each other so well, to be able to play off of each other's strengths so well, and to just perform. Those were some really exciting experiences. We were really just operating at a very high level, operating at a fast level, playing off of each other in a very smart way. And whenever the three of us were together, we were pretty powerful. So it can be a beautiful thing, when it works.
I have a yard guy right outside my window. That's what I was talking about. That's my signal to the editors. We're going to snip this little section out right here until he can move on. He was right at my window, probably about 8 feet away. All right. Oh, go ahead. No,
I was going to say, to the credit of your mic, I only, I didn't pick up on too much of that background noise. So,
well, I was holding the mute button most of the time to avoid the input.
Got it.
Because he's got an air blower going on and it's got a pretty high shrill tone to it. So I fear. Can you hear it right now?
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, he will move out of this area in just a moment and get around the other side of the house or the yard here. Which way is he going? Oh, okay.
There you go.
I hope that's it. Yeah, maybe that's it. All right. That's my signal to my editor there. So anyway, well, when you got into the actual transaction of making the transition with your dad, do you mind sharing, without divulging any, secrets or details, just the approach that was taken and what was negotiated and how did you come to the structure that you used?
Yeah. So we did a valuation. And then we worked off that valuation over a period of, so it was an earnout over a period of, I guess it was 10 years. So, what I often tell people is he probably got a better price, but I got better terms. So it all kind of evened out in the end. And he, to my dad's credit, when it was 1995, and we had sort of a heart to heart, and we'd talked about, the business before, and I had said, no, I'm going to go my own way. Thank you. Also, because I had a great relationship with my dad at the time, and I'm just like, I want to keep a great relationship with my dad. I don't want business to muddy that. So he said, well, think about it one more time. And he said, it was a Friday, and he goes, can you let me know by Sunday? And I'm like, well, why Sunday? He said, well, next week I'm talking to several firms about buying Deli Associates. So he actually did have 2 or 3 firms, that were eyeing the business largely, for its client base to buy Deli Associates. So I thought it over the weekend and came to him on Sunday and said, let's do this, because I was 22 years old and I thought, I'm about to potentially pass on business ownership, and I shouldn't just pass on that. I think I owe it to give it a try. I often tell people that you're in a good place when time flies. And I feel like I looked up and a year had passed. And I was like, how did that happen? When you're in a good place, you're not watching the clock. You're not worried about, oh, it's 5 o'clock. You're not worried about working on the weekends or coming in early or staying late. You're worried about learning and doing and focused on the issues at hand. So it was a very rapid time of my life. I mean, it felt like everything was happening very quickly, and I was just delighted to be immersed in it. So I think, that was a good indicator that, okay, I think I've made a sound decision here. The interesting thing is, after I said yes, again at 22, looking at my first P&L, and it was in August, and so I'm looking at this document that I've never seen before, and I'm starting to interpret it and think, okay, sales, cost of goods, okay, this is our operating expenditures, okay. So I'm sitting there looking at it and I say, Dad, why is the number at the bottom here in parentheses? He's like, well, we lost money in August. I was like, okay. Dad, why is this next column an even bigger number in parentheses? He said, well, we've been losing money all year. I said, oh, good to know. So needless to say, one of my first orders of business was to figure out why and how to fix it. And a lot of the reasons why is that, when you're in business for a long time, you have certain suppliers that you get comfortable with and good people and all that stuff. But in many cases, they were amping up their costs and rates year over year over year. And the next thing you know, you turn around, you're spending, $5,000 for something that should cost you $500 or something like that. So, I started really looking at those line items with scrutiny and saying, where are we out of balance? Where can we be saving money? Where can we be doing better with our relationships? And in many cases, it was a case of companies that just over time had kind of amped up their costs or their rates. So by the next year, we were back to a net positive. So I won't take all the credit. It was obviously the team. It was my dad. It was a lot of things. And I think he was energized by my entry into the business. He certainly was. But that was, something that I looked at very closely is, not looking to dismantle everything or be a cannonball on the ship, but just start asking questions. Why? Why are we doing this?
Right.
Can we be doing better? Should we be doing better? And a lot of good came out of that.
Well, that's inevitably when there is a transition of a business. And I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs who are entering the market to buy businesses rather than leave a corporate job and try to do a startup of some kind, take an idea, but rather they turn their energy and resources to acquiring a pre-existing business. And that is inevitably one of the immediate benefits of that new set of eyes and a new view coming in. Things that had just been sort of evolved and accepted and rolled in to the business are, I won't say easily, but they are readily turned over and adjusted accordingly to usually always help the bottom line and help the outcome of the business. So there's some very quick wins sometimes. And in these cases, sometimes what I see, the seller of the business is usually engaged to stay on for some short period of time. Mm-hmm. And even they get energized by the change, just like you said your dad did. They get energized because maybe they're a little older and they've kind of started the downshift, or they've run out of the energy that they once had, and they see the new energy coming in, and it's much easier to be a fan in the stands and get excited about the game that's being played, rather than being out there being the player on the field. So it is an interesting dynamic for sure.
My brother is going through that right now. He just sold his business for a very large sum, and is going to be staying on for a period of time, and very excited by that. And I often remind him, you do have to, downshift eventually. You can't just keep doing this forever, I don't think. Remember why you sold it. You wanted to, take some time and do the things you want to do. So, kind of a younger brother telling a little brother, don't lose sight of the big picture. Don't lose sight of your goals. But I am the youngest by 10 years, so I don't know how much of that translates into getting through.
And also, you're going to have to mark your words, because maybe 10 years from now, somebody's going to be whispering in your ear the same idea, and you got to see how you're going to relate to it.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, I think we're about up on time. Thank you so much for sitting in and sharing. If people are interested in reaching out and getting in touch with you, what's the best way to do it?
So they can certainly find me online at delianet.com. or on LinkedIn, Ed Delia. And if anyone has questions or wants to run something by me, I'm always happy to talk and always happy to offer some thoughts, so that's never a problem.
Very, very good. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing, and really appreciate your input today.
Thanks so much, Doug. It was great being here with you. Take care.
All right. Well, folks, we're going to wrap this up. And as always, the links that Ed mentioned will be in our show notes. So just hop down, mash one of those links if you want to reach out and talk to Ed and learn more about his patented process for helping you brand and rebrand. I do like to remind people we've got a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name. If you're listening on your favorite streaming service, think about peeking in on the video over there and take a look, browse through the archives, leave us a comment, give us some feedback and ideas. Would love to hear from you. With that, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.